looking at this composition, I have in order to fit everything on there, my figure to ground relationship would be a little bit out of whack. All my objects would be really small within this format shape. So I want to maintain that 2/3 to 1/3 figure to ground ratio. So that means I'm going to have to figure out, is there something in this composition that isn't going to fit? So I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to make an L and I'm going to turn it inwards. I'm going to take my right hand and make an L and I'm going to flip it over on top like that. And I'm going to make a rectangle. I'm going to close one eye, and if you move the rectangle closer to your face, it makes the figure to ground relationship smaller figure, larger ground. If you move it farther away, it makes that figure to ground relationship closer. So you want to kind of find a figure to ground relationship that you like and that you can work with, right? So that gives you can go to the art store and you can buy a viewfinder for like 10 bucks, or you can use the viewfinder that's stuck to the end of your arms. This also is helpful because you can change the format shape of your viewfinder based on the format shape of the substrate that you're painting on. So when I do this, I can kind of plan how I want my composition to work. I don't want any of my objects sitting on the bottom edge of the canvas, okay? What that does is it brings all of those objects right up against the picture plane and there's no space, right? So we want to set these objects back in space a little bit, give them a ground plane to sit on. So I'm going to want my closest objects maybe to start around, I don't know, 1 inch or 1.5 inches above the bottom of my canvas, right? So if I set that up with my handy viewfinder, and then I look at how the other objects are going to fit. So I think I'm going to place this gray, dark gray object here. And I want to think about height to width ratio of what I like to call the aggregate shape. So if I were to draw an outline around all of the major objects in my composition, that is a bunch of small shapes combined into one, right? So that's an aggregate shape. So I want to think about that aggregate shape. How tall is it from the top of that napkin to the bottom of the cone in relation to the width? So it's wider than it is tall, but not a tremendous amount based on my format shape. So I want to think about how that relationship is going to work. So it is slightly taller than it is wide. So that's going to help me. So the width, if I want the gray sphere to sit somewhere over here, and I'm going to have my right limit of my format shape on the edge of the canvas here, because I'm going to have to crop something. I can't fit everything in the composition. If I fit everything in there, all the objects would be really, really small. Okay, so where I'm choosing to crop my composition is going to be that cylinder on the right. Okay, so I'm going to crop that. So it's going to be here on the edge. And then I want to think about the height. What's the tallest thing in my composition is the napkin. And it's going to probably go off the composition on the top here. So I've got a format shape that basically looks like this, right? I could fit all of my objects in that overall shape, right? Does that make sense? Okay, So that gives it, how many of you have ever, like when you were a kid in 2nd grade and you were doing a picture of a person, you drew the head at the top, then you drew the neck, then you drew the shoulders, then you drew the hands and the legs, and somewhere around the knees you ran out of room? It's because you weren't thinking of what the limits were of your composition. And this, a lot of this is your choice, where you choose to put things in your composition, right? So you really want to think about the positive and negative shape relationship. What are the really important positive and negative shapes? The whole thing is going to be like a jigsaw puzzle when the painting is finished, right? Nothing's more important than the other, and you'll hear me say this a lot during the semester. Every bit, every spot on the painting is as important as every other spot on the painting, right? You have to think about all of it. Even if it's an empty area up here in the corner, it's still as important in the way that you think about it as the coolest, most fun part of the painting to paint, which is your focal point, okay? All right, so I'm gonna quickly just sort of knock in my basic shapes based on my aggregate shape. And I want to think about, when I'm drawing this, I'm not just thinking about what's the positive shape of this gray half sphere, but what's the negative shape created by the flower pot and the smaller sphere that's sitting on top of the flower pot. So I'm not just drawing these objects, I'm drawing that negative shape as well, where it comes down to the back of the platform, right? So I'm thinking about all of these things interlocking all of the time. I'm going to let the front of that cone come down a little closer. Here. And just like I did my initial sketch, blocking in sketch the other day with the collage, I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because I can make adjustments. So I want to pay close attention to the interspaces between objects and get those correct. I want to think about where the top of this sphere is in relationship to the objects over here. So I'm always thinking about relationships and ratios. So then I'm going to have, that's a little taller, the top of my cylinder here, and the bottom of the cylinder is going to go off the edge on the right. So I'm going to lose that small sphere, but that's okay. You want to be really intentional about, and I'm going to lose more of my napkin than I initially thought, which is also fine. So at this point, I want to look at it and judge if I feel like everything is sitting okay within the composition based on what's important, right? What are the important shapes? What do I want to make sure I've got represented in the painting? And everything kind of 2/3 to 1/3 figure to ground relationship. I want to make sure I'm always including the back edge of whatever platform that my objects are sitting on. So it'll give them some ground, somewhere to sit. And that also allows for space to expand within the composition. These are really shallow compositions, so we're not working with deep space because we've got the black cardboard behind, but that's by design. at this point. So basically, I'm going to go with this the way it is. I'm not going to make any adjustments to it. I feel pretty good about it. Now, I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to lightly sort of indicate, just like you did with your collage, where those major shadow forms are, like where the core shadow comes across, where any strong cast shadows are, just so I'm thinking about those values, right? Got a cast shadow underneath here. Shadow under there. This light is really even in the room right now. We're hoping to get some spotlights that are going to help us make more interesting composition. So I've got a shadow here, and on the larger sphere, got a cast shadow underneath. Not much shadow on the cylinder. That brown cardboard kind of absorbs light and sucks it in more than the white objects do. Okay, so now I'm ready to start the first phase of my painting, which is called underpainting. So